Hello and welcome to Thought for January the 2nd. Our readings are Genesis chapters 3 and 4, Psalms chapters 3, 4 and 5, and Matthew chapters 3 and 4. Our thought is, but by every word. Today's fourth chapter of Matthew contains the account of Jesus being tempted after being led up by the Spirit into the wilderness. Chapter 4 verse 1. This opening verse arrests the attention of diligent readers. It seems astonishing that God's Spirit brought about Christ's temptations. Jesus, now that the Spirit of God had come to rest on him, chapter 3 verse 16, is first tempted to use that power to create bread, verse 3. As there is no food in the wilderness to which the Spirit had led him, and 40 days had elapsed, he showed his power to create food later when he fed the 5,000. To feed himself would have been easy. The primary lesson that jumps into our thinking as we read the three different types of temptation is how Jesus quotes in each case, in rejecting temptation, words which God caused Moses to write and which we find in his book called Deuteronomy. The temptations each have a sense of unreality about them. There is, for example, no very high mountain from which a tempter could have shown him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory, as we read in verse 8. There are examples of the three basic types of temptation, which we read of a couple of weeks ago in 1 John 3 verse 16. For all that is in the world, the desires of the flesh, the desires of the eyes, and the pride of possessions, is not from the Father, but is from the world. How did Matthew, in writing his gospel, get the information about Christ's temptations? Well, Jesus had not yet started to call any disciples to him. It was not until chapter 9 verse 9 is there reference to Matthew being called. And as we think on this, we realise the disciples could only have known about these temptations through Jesus telling them. And how did Jesus teach? Well, much of the time he taught by parables, and these were often not of literal events. So we can conclude that Jesus told of his temptations in the form of a parable, the primary aim being to show that he too suffered temptation. See Hebrews 4 verse 15. And even more, how temptations are overcome. That is, the power of the narrative we read today. His mind was full of what God had caused to be written for human instruction. We especially noted his quotation to the tempter from Deuteronomy 8 verse 3. Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. And that is the fundamental way in which we push fleshly temptations to one side. Is that not a primary reason why we read portions of God's Word every day? How much of God's Word comes to the surface in our thinking when the need arises? It should do. Well, thank you once again for joining us for Thought for the Day, where we can open up the pages of God's Word, knowing that Word to be a lamp to our feet and a light to our path.